let's start with Brendan Rodgers, a man who also will be absolutely delighted with his side's performance. A comeback victory as well against Liverpool. And Mike, first of all, Brendan Rodgers is a manager who I have always had admiration for, but I've always found him quite hard to warm to. And I wonder if that is his level of intensity, do you think?
There's something about him. I'm not really sure. It goes back to his Liverpool days, though, that he can be seen as a little bit cringeworthy sometimes from the outside looking in. And, he comes out with a lot of coach speak, I suppose, and that he's, as though he's been on so many courses and he's just relaying what he's heard from somewhere else before and, kind of, I don't know, passing it off as his own. I'm not really sure. People seem to misinterpret him, though, and I think he's quite misunderstood in that sense. I think he is very driven and very intense about the way he goes about his own work. And he's got a high capacity for learning. I think, we talk about forward-thinking managers, and it's one of those phrases we throw about, and it can mean so many different things for so many different managers. But Brendan Rodgers, we're going back 15 years ago now, was one of the foremost forward-thinking managers when he came out of academy football and from behind the scenes at Chelsea. And I don't think he's ever stopped learning, and I don't think he's a manager that ever will stop learning. So all the latest advances in psychology and sports science and all of these things, I think Brendan Rodgers is a manager that doesn't just learn his trade and then work off his experience after that. I don't think he ever stops learning his trade. I think he's a lifelong learner, and I think that's why he's been able to, why he's back in the top four. Having had a job with Liverpool, he's now at a club with lesser resources in Leicester, and he's doing it all over again, kind of setting very similar standards to what he set at Liverpool 7-8 years ago.
And there's a sort of unwavering belief as well, isn't there? The confidence, it might not have gone right at Liverpool. It might not have been brilliant at times towards the end at Celtic. There was the Reading disappointment as well earlier in his career, but he always does seem to bounce back. And there's always that sort of, I guess, that steely determination, knowing that what he's doing is right to him and it will yield results. I guess, is he kind of that mentality, well, what I'm doing is right, it just was the wrong place?
Yeah, I think it's about emotion, and I think it's about belief, and it comes from within, and this is a flow state for him. It's not something he doesn't have to dig deep to find this determination to see something through right to the very end. And I think, his career, his football management career is a lifelong thing for him, and he's going to see it through to the end. And, it's going to be a long journey for him. That he would, not for a moment will he doubt himself. I think that determination and that drive to just keep going and not letting any obstacle get in your way is it's innate within him. And, like I say, it's a flow state, and he tries to put that into his players. It is something that behind the scenes, it's always about, we tend to see tactics as a logical thing. It's about thinking rather than about emotion. But Brendan Rodgers is a brilliant example of how, that people who are emotional and are driven by emotion can be logical as well. They can be rational, and they can, be very tactically aware and very, very shrewd and astute in the way they set teams up. It can come from a place of emotion tactics. It doesn't have to come from this logical step-by-step, almost academic or nerdy type, anything like that. It can come from within and from a feeling of how a team should set up and how they should play.
But he's also a hard worker on the training ground as well. He said before, I feel at home on the training ground when I'm working on a day-to-day basis. And he's also said as well, he said training should be like a match day. We should be working as hard as we do over the course of a 90-minute game. So, the emotion obviously is big for him, and that's the main thing as you highlight there. But he just, I guess, loves getting stuck in as well.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's the opposite side of the process he uses is that internal feeling. It's introverted feeling. The opposite side of it is extroverted thinking, and that's like your organising side of things. Now, with people who use introverted feeling, that piece is always there of wanting to have everything organised, but it's this determination to push through no matter what. The organisation can go wrong, but nothing's going to stop me getting to achieving my goals at the end. And I think that's the main thing with Rodgers that separates him from some of these more logical managers is just seeing things through right to the end. but it's all still there. The organisation skills are there. It's just he can't be spread to, if something doesn't feel good to him, then he won't follow through on it. So if there's, in terms of step by step setting up his week and preparing his team, once he's convinced that this is the right way to go, nothing's getting in his way. Whereas, more logical type managers will adapt. So if someone throws you a curveball during the week and there's something you've got to adapt to, then they'll adapt and they'll weigh up the resources that they've got. Rodgers needs to know what's the magnet in the middle of the field? What is it I'm going for? And once he's set his eyes and once he's absolutely determined that this is it, this is what we're trying to achieve this week, then that's where the drive and determination comes in, and there's kind of no stopping him at that stage.
When you say curveballs, Mike, just to kind of elaborate on what you were saying, that things that might be thrown into the mix, are you talking maybe players coming to him and saying, I'm not feeling 100%, or are you thinking more opposition, news coming out about a key injury or a potential tactical change, or maybe even a managerial sacking? Or are you talking about a mixture of both, really?
Yeah, well, it can be anything in terms of a curveball in terms of your preparation during the week. I think more it's about, with his players, he wants all his players to be in that same frame of mind as him. And in terms of getting to that end goal at the end of the week, it's about drilling that same level of determination into those players and making sure that his tactics suit the players emotionally. I think when he sets a team up tactically, he wants to bring out the best of individual players' attributes. So then curveballs tend not to be thrown his way because emotionally his players will be in a good place, during the week in preparation for a game. And, we look at the kind of stretches of form that Leicester go through. They can be Brendan Rodgers teams in general can be quite patchy, as in, or streaky. You can go on these fantastic streaks of results because everybody's in a good place. The entire game plan suits each individual within the team. It's getting the best out of everybody, which I think is probably his biggest genius in being able to do that and orchestrate that. So it's not necessarily that too many curveballs will come his way in the first place, because his ability to make the pieces fit and keep everyone in a nice, happy, emotional space is really good. But then you reach the end of a road of a streak, and you can go on these real hot streaks. And when you reach the end of the road of it, then that's when this is when the curveballs start coming, or trying to deal with a new set of dynamics that have changed from what was working so well. Suddenly, opposition understand what it is you're doing. You might lose a player or two, and then trying to adjust and manage resources is not necessarily his strength. So it's that ability to maneuver logistical issues is probably where he begins to find things tough. But when when he's got a settled system that suits each player as individuals and that everybody's in a good space emotionally, he can produce. That, like I say, his tactics come from a place of it's almost like he's trying to produce a piece of art on the pitch. That here's the resources I've got, here's the players that I've got, here's their individual attributes and skill sets. Now, if I put this player here and that player there, and we play this system, and it might be slightly lopsided or whatever, but it's entirely designed to bring the best out of everybody as individuals and play to everybody's strengths, so everybody's happy. So this is how you can get this hot streak that can continue for weeks and weeks at a time, where a team like Leicester now can be playing such good football and really in a good place with themselves psychologically.
Yeah, and they do tend to give top six opposition real problems, don't they? Whenever they meet them, actually, it's some of the games that they perhaps should be winning that they tend to drop points in. Does then that mean that on the motivational side of things, his team talk is kind of done throughout the week?
Yeah, I think he doesn't necessarily. He does have a good understanding of psychology, so it's not like he's not it's not natural for him to put himself in the shoes of his players. This is learned behaviour through his understanding of psychology and all his personal development work, that he begins to anticipate players' needs through that way. But it's just getting them into an emotional space. But what can happen is, when you have a good set of results and then expectations go up and up and up, and it becomes more about the results rather than the process, that can be an area where he's not necessarily, he's not at his very best in those scenarios. So we talk about Liverpool in the title race, and when it suddenly, it suddenly started going wrong for them. And Leicester last season, a few injuries came along. The winning formula stopped working for them. You got to the back end of the season and you just couldn't seem to buy a win in those last few weeks of the season when they just needed to get over the line. And it's those kinds of situations where he maybe struggles to get in ahead of time of his players' emotions, but he's very sensitive to where his players are in the here and now emotionally, and that's kind of what he's tapping into when he's putting a team together.
And in terms of the players that he uses, there's obviously some very, very good young players at Leicester, some of which have been signed under Rodgers, some of which were already there, of course, before he arrived. He's talked previously, and I think this was actually when he was at Swansea, so many years ago, but he's talked about signing players in his image. Now, of course, he didn't have a long career himself, but he's talked about signing players who are absolutely 100% signed up to what he wants to do, who want to keep learning, who want to keep improving, who see the game in the same way as he does. So I guess he has to be very careful about the sort of players that he works with. And we talked earlier about Tisdale going into a squad full of players who just weren't his and weren't suited to his style. Is that why maybe he has struggled in the past, because he's not been able to imprint his philosophy quickly enough on those players? Whereas at Leicester, he's kind of had that time to build. And, after what happened in 2015 and 2016, there was slightly less expectation when he came in, and he's got them going, hasn't he? And now challenging again at the right end of the table.
Yeah, I think recruitment will always be important, and it's a side of recruitment that's possibly very misunderstood in terms of what type of personalities you get. He understands the attributes of players. I think he really tries to work hard on once he gets a player under his wing. There's an excellent chapter in Living on the Volcano about this, where he explained his process that he goes through with every single player. And commitment being the number one non-negotiable. And he kind of almost explains to players, he breaks it down as you've got so many years in your career, times that by 12, this is how many pay packets you've got left, and they're ticking down. And that money's got to last you till you're 80 years old. And he goes through these processes of, to try and instill that responsibility within a player that you've really got to be committed to your profession, because your career is going to pass you by if you're not. Once I know that I've got that from you, then I don't need to keep coming back to you every 2 minutes asking if you're committed. It's either there or it's not. And I think he'll know, whether if certain players haven't got it, he needs to get them out and replace them with players that will. I think most of it, though, comes from drilling, not necessarily recruitment. I think he's very good at framing a player's situation, where he's at in his career now, where he's been before, and where he's going, and how he can help them get to where they really need to go and want to go. But it takes 100%, absolute commitment. That's a non-negotiable. To match his level of determination and intensity day to day in training, we'll put systems in place that make sure the rest of it all takes care of itself. You just need to turn up with that intensity. In fact, he used a very good analogy in the sense that, we'll talk about a surgeon who's performing heart surgery or whatever. If he's got to do 5 operations in a day, you can't just turn up for 4 and then be a bit tired for the 5th. That 5th person needs you just as much as the first. And, that's what you need to understand. It's like you just keep going through to the end. There's no backing out halfway through with something. You commit 100%.
Well, he started his coaching career, with the under-9s, in fact. So he's worked his way up, and he's always had an eye for good young players as well. And one thing he's said in the past, Mike, is that he just wants to make young players better, and he just wants to make them feel special, and that they are, that they are the centre, really. They are the player that the club needs. So I guess that constant sort of reassurance will help. But also on a day-to-day basis, he must be handy to sort of have a word if a young player is maybe sort of threatening to go off the rails, or is maybe struggling with the expectation as well.
Yeah, I think it's very much about connection, and he does like to tap into what it is that makes a player tick. I mean, we go back to even the Joey Barton podcast, similar personality type, about understanding that each player is the hero in their own story. You need to tap into what that story is and what it is they're trying to achieve for themselves in order to get the best out of them. So I think it is a big feature for Rodgers, is those individual connections, and checking in with the player regularly. Again, Neil Warnock would talk about, having a conversation with players every day and understand, it's very much in Rodgers' mindset to always know what's going on, I think, for his players, away from the football, during the week and just to connect with them. It might not even necessarily be the subject of the conversation, but I think if there's something not quite right in a player's life away from the game, there'll just be a vibration that Rodgers is picking up on that something's not right here. And just by connecting, it's not necessarily about the tone of the conversation or the subject of the conversation, but by that check-in process, he's able to connect with players and understand what's going on for them.
So do you think that Rodgers, this is a prediction that no one's going to hold you to, hopefully, but do you think that Rodgers has another big job in him? I mean, Leicester's a huge club, obviously, in the Premier League, doing really well, top six, but he's not, let's face it, he's not going to go back to Liverpool. But if a big club in Europe or indeed in England came calling, do you think he'd be able to make the step up, or that pressure that you spoke about earlier, do you think that will always hold him back? No,
I think he's more than capable. I do. I think he's the best British coach around and has been for some time. Purely based on experience now, if nothing else, because we're going back 6-7 years that he was, in that title race up against Manchester City. I mean, I'm led to believe that the Barcelona guys at Manchester City are keen on Rodgers, and that if Pep Guardiola, he would be their first choice. Whether there's any truth in that, I'm not entirely sure, but I do think he's got another big job in him, because I think there's some managers, some of the very big players. We talked about Carlo Ancelotti and Cristiano Ronaldo, how he speaks about Carlo Ancelotti as a manager. I think he's able to connect with the very, very biggest players on a one-to-one individual level, and I think most of the top jobs call for that. To get the biggest players on side. I think he's more, Brendan Rodgers is more than capable of managing Real Madrid. We say what a mad job that must be to go and manage Real Madrid, and how difficult it must be. But at the core of that job is you've got Galacticos in that dressing room and you want them on side. And I think Brendan Rodgers is the sort of manager that can get those individuals on side and bring the best out of them, not just cater to their needs and make sure they turn up on a Saturday or Sunday wanting to be at the very best, in terms of motivation, determination, emotions and stuff like that. But also I think he can produce a game plan that brings the best out of several players all at the same time, so that the kind of the success of it is exponential. It's not just, you put 5 players into a team all playing at the best. You're not just getting 5 different players. You're getting the whole unit itself is even bigger than the sum of its parts. And I think he's capable of doing that and striking upon systems and doing things in ways that you might not necessarily predict. But it makes all of those players happy and performing. And I think he's more than capable of that. So, yeah, I mean, to answer the question, I'm quite happy to say I think he has got another big job in him. And I think if he ever found himself in a situation where he was at the biggest budget club in a league, then he would deliver, as he did continuously at Celtic, as a prime example. I think, he can translate that success to another country with the biggest budget.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see if that turns out. Maybe Chelsea will come knocking again for him. Who knows? Just one final question that got me thinking there, based off what you said, Mike, is should he go in at another club? And obviously Leicester is well run. They've had tragedy obviously in the past few years, but it's a very well run club. If he was at a club and there was a bit of carnage, a few troubles behind the scenes, how well is he likely to deal with that? And is he the sort of manager who will just try and shield his players away from that, deflect the attention constantly back onto the pitch, or and try and ignore the questions about it in the media? Or is he the sort of manager who will sort of try and just constantly reassure everyone that there's nothing really going on?
I think that could be possibly his biggest struggle, is if there's stuff going on behind the scenes where he's being undermined. I think he just needs to. He's probably a manager that needs to focus on his players and the close-knit nature of his dressing room, and just keep that house in order, and everything else is peripheral. So, you talk about a Real Madrid or somewhere and the politics that goes around, that's only a problem when it's the politics that are undermining your ability to do your job. I think otherwise, I think he can just keep a distance from everything and just stay, hyper focused on what's most important to him. And, as long as that's not disturbed, then yeah, I think he's capable of managing at the top level. But those kind of peripheral things, once they infiltrate, that's when I think he would struggle.
If you want to use what you've heard from Mike, and indeed, in previous weeks as well, on any of the managers that we've focused on, to improve your betting, then Mike, there is a free case study available, isn't there?
Yeah, I've been applying this to my betting for a good number of months now, nearly a year since lockdown, and it's really helped me to apply some of these principles in my betting. I found quite a winning strategy with it. So I put together a case study video that anyone can access for free. Just kind of explains how it works and how you can kind of turn this new way of thinking into understanding the game in new and different ways, because it's kind of so dominated by data science and things like that nowadays. It can be really hard to make a profit based on team strength alone.